안녕 친구들. I hope you've been well. It is that time of week where I recap the episode, or usually it's the episodes, right? But this week it is just one episode because of the Chuseok preemption. So we have only episode 13 to really talk about. And for those of you who've already been to my blog and you've read, welcome Twinkles. For those of you who are new to this channel, welcome. Thank you for subscribing. I am still a little surprised that people are subscribing to listen to me talk and kind of add my 2 cents to what's already out there on the internet. But episode 13 for me, perhaps it was because I had so much hope and expectation coming off of the, kind of the huge cliffhanger of episode 12, that the episode 13 felt a little bit of a disappointment to me. And some of you may agree, some of you may disagree. I know that some of my friends online have been telling me they were crying buckets as they watched episode 13. I think once the amnesia, plot development got incorporated into the episode, there was a little bit of an emotional distance that happened with me, so that as Kongshiri was crying, although I could appreciate her pain and her frustration and the sacrifice that she was making so that Chungwon could, live and return to the land of the living, I just didn't feel as though I was emotionally invested in that whole, journey with her. And part of it is because whenever the amnesia plot development happens, it's frustrating for me personally as a viewer, because then I feel as though everything that I've gone through with the characters just kind of poof disappears into thin air, and then I have to wait until the amnesia, disappears, and then the character who's suffering from amnesia recovers all of his or her, memories. And what's funny is I feel like this typically happens with the male characters. What's with that, right? I've been watching Korean drama since I would say late 80s. I know. So long ago, right? But I think the first time I saw the amnesia, plot development, it was interesting. And then afterwards, it felt as though every other drama would incorporate that in whenever it was just convenient for them. Now, granted, with The Master's Son, I had a sneaking suspicion that this is where the writers were going to go, because the story of, I believe, The Wolf and the Goat, the wolf, at least one source that I read, after an avalanche, the wolf actually experiences amnesia and can't remember everything about, all of his experiences with his friend the goat. And so I kind of braced myself for that, hoping that the writers weren't going to go there. And of course they did. And part of that, I think, has to do with the goat and the wolf story. What I did appreciate, though, was the fact that the writers, instead of just making it plainly an amnesia story, they really did try to incorporate more of the ghostly elements. So, anyway, I'll stop because we only have one episode to talk about today, episode 13, and I want to try to make this recap under 20 minutes. I know some of you are probably like, I don't think she can do it. I will try. So we're at 3 minutes and 50 seconds already, and who knows. Anyway, all right, so let's go ahead and get started. Episode 13 starts off with Jungwon flatlined on the operating table. Kongshil is outside, saying her goodbye to the ghost or the spirit of Jungwon, and then Jungwon disappears. And of course, we know as the viewers that it's because his body has been resuscitated, in the sense that the vitals are now normal, he has a steady heart rate, and so on, right? And so I think I mentioned maybe in last week's either the video recap or the blog post that I can't remember, my medical stuff is, by now a very far memory, but I believe the human brain could go, I can't remember whether it's 3 minutes or 6 minutes. I'm sure some of you will know. But that's just enough time for Chungwon's body to technically be dead, come out, say his goodbyes, think he's dead because he's seen her now in his ghostly form, and then get ready to leave. Well, anyway, The doctors come out, and at which point Aunt Ju has arrived on the scene. She looks and notices that Kung Shi is there, and so she's thinking, my nephew has again been put in danger because of this woman. And then the doctors tell her that, or tell them in the waiting room in front of or the hallway in front of the surgery, that he did flatline for a little bit, but his vitals are now stabilized, and that the operation will be successfully completed. And at which point then Kung Shi, breathes a sigh of relief, and then the woman says, so he's not dead? So he hasn't died? I need to go see him to make sure that his spirit returns safely. And at that point, Aunt Ju smacks her one and says, how dare you talk of my nephew dying? And she's like, this is it. From here on out, stay away from him, right? And so, you see Kang-woo and Secretary Kim realizing that the aunt is going to try to bar Kung-shil from Jung-won's hospital bed, trying to get her to see him or what have you, especially Secretary Kim, who thankfully is not as evil as we initially expected at the end of episode 12. But anyway, when the surgery is successful, she goes in, she sees him, she realizes he's not waking up. And to some extent, each patient responds differently to anesthesia. And so you kind of wonder, naturally speaking, Jung-won was probably taking his time waking up from the anesthesia. But Kung-shil goes completely onto the spiritual realm because she knows that Jung-won, as the spirit, has seen her and probably thinks that he has died. So she goes rushing to the ghost consultant, who turns out to be a very legitimate ghost consultant. I mean, she can really contact the spiritual realm in that sense. And so she goes, she meets with the lady who is creepy, and she tells her, can you please call him, let him know that he's not dead. And the ghost consultant says, because he saw you, he probably thinks he's died and is probably making preparations to enter into the afterlife. And as she says that, we then see Jung-won in this very starkly empty, blackened room on a little folding chair reading. And then there were none. Agatha Christie's, and then there were none. And I think last week I mentioned what that book was and how the American title, for those of you in the United States wanting to find that book, it's under the title of 10 Little Indians. I read that, I think, when I was in 7th grade, age 12 or 13, right? But anyway, so he finishes reading that, and in that spiritual world, he is able to read. And then as he finishes that book, the ghost of Hiju, or the spirit of Hiju, shows up, and she says, oh, you can see me now. You can read, Jung-won. And then at that point, she says, oh, so now we can finally be together. And I'm just kind of like, eh. But anyway, Hiju gets ready to lead Jung-won through, I guess, the bright lights and into the afterworld, if you will, and then Jung-won is about to follow. And at that point, he hears a voice and this blinding light that is preceded by the strong gush of wind, and it's basically intervention from the physical world, where Kung-shil and the ghost consultant are trying to make contact with Jung-won to let him know he's not dead. He needs to return back to the physical world. And one of the ways that the ghost consultant is able to kind of connect with Jung-won is because Kung-shil lends her at that point the sun pendant that Jung-won had given her as a way of making, catching Jung-won's attention to tell him it's real, or, what have you. Now, the only thing with this amnesia, calling Jung-won back from the dead type of thing, is that there are two conditions to this. The ghost consultant tells Kung-shil, if I agree to do this, then what do I get in exchange? And so the exchange is that Kung-shil will be, in some respects, a possession, if you will, or a tool for the ghost consultant to use. Because the ghost consultant says she has all these abilities to contact ghosts in the spiritual realm, but she doesn't have the ability to see them, which Kung-shil does. And so Kung-shil asks, how will that change, or what have you? And the woman says, from here on out, your life will not be yours to live. And basically, she's going to be at this woman's beck and call, which is going to make things very difficult for Kungshu because she doesn't like seeing ghosts. But at this point, she's so desperate to have Chungwon back that she's willing to sacrifice anything and everything. And so, my earlier comment last week about the, reversal or the actual role of who's playing the wolf, who's playing the goat. I think, this really does encapsulate that or reflect that type of role reversal, because we're seeing in this episode more and more of Kungshu willing to sacrifice her life, just so that she can have Chungwon back, or that he can still be alive, even though she physically won't be able to be part of his life anymore. The other stipulation, though, is that Chungwon, in order to bring him back, is going to forget everything associated with Kungshu. So anything associated with the bright taeyang or anything like that, he's going to forget. And so when Chungwon has that huge gush of wind, the blinding light, and then he looks and there's like this little shiny pendant that he had given Kungshu, and then a voice he hears saying, "You are not dead. You need to return to the real world." So Chungwon wakes up in his hospital bed, and the first person he sees is, of course, the adult twin of Hiju, Hanna. And Hanna then, calls everyone in, saying that the patient has awakened and all of this stuff. And everyone except, of course, Kungshu, who is running back to the hospital at that point just to make sure that Chungwon's spirit has returned safely. She is actually not able to ultimately see him in the hospital, but everyone else is stunned then to realize that Chungwon has no memory since the time where, he snipped the rose petal head, the head of the rose. And so Chungwon wakes up from the hospital bed thinking that he has actually indeed been struck by lightning after he had taunted the, wife ghost. Anyway, the aunt then seizes this opportunity and makes sure no one tells Chungwon about Taegongsil. And her reasoning, which is, logical, is that if no one mentions it, he won't remember, and then everything will be great. So in the aftermath of Chungwon then waking up and Kungshu is packed with this ghost consultant, Kangwoo then ends up spending a lot more time with her, trying to help her. And he tells her at one point, from here on out, I'll be the one to try to protect you. And there's this very poignant conversation that he has with Kungshu about whether, she's going to be okay because she does love, Chungwon. And Kungshu makes this comment that, the feelings that I have for him are still here. So that's okay. I'll be okay. Anyhow, so while that's going on, Chungwon is now, other than the whole, wound in his back, is back to his normal self. Although you can definitely tell that he feels off balance because he's lost a good chunk of his memory. And so as he goes about his day or trying to recover, he starts realizing that so many things have happened and that things that he finds out of character have happened. For instance, Secretary Kim makes this comment when Chungwon gets this huge bouquet of flowers from the CEO of Giant Mall. He says, "Why would the CEO of Giant Mall be giving me flowers? Has something changed?" And then Secretary Kim's like, "Yeah, you guys are now kind of buddies, or in my mind, frenemies, right?" But he's like, "Yeah, you went golfing with him just the other day." And Chungwon's like, I did this? And he finds out that he's planning on that Chungwon is establishing this, like child care center at Kingdom and all of this stuff. And he's like, I would do this. And so, he's trying to adjust. Anyway, when he comes home from the hospital, one of the things that I did think was significant and I did appreciate is the fact that as he sits there, with the VP, and then the aunt kind of goes off to get some food for Chungwon because he tells her, I'm really hungry, right? Ever the motherly aunt, she rushes off to get some of his favorite foods. He then gestures for the VP to stick around. And I love the fact that the VP, even though he may be slightly older than Chungwon, there is this kind of frenemy relationship, like a love-hate relationship. I don't think Chungwon and the VP would say they love each other, but certainly there is this kind of camaraderie aspect, and there's quite a bit of tension and what have you. But anyway, so Chungwon tries to get the VP to tell him that one piece of information that the aunt is just forbidding everyone else to talk about. And the VP's like, I don't know what you're talking about. what do you mean? What is this thing that my lips are just itching to tell you? I don't know what you're talking about, right? And so Junwon's like, fine, take your time, tell me when you're ready and when Ant's not around. And then he puts his feet on the coffee table, as is his habit. And then he realizes that he's placed them on top of a stack of books, which shocks him. He's like, whose books are these? And then as he flips through, he realizes that he can read, and he tells the VP, I can read. What's going on, right? And so, the, of course, implication is that when he fully then confessed to Gongshil at, the hospital as the ghost, that, I do love you, and then he had gone, that love accepted so fully had then displaced the fear and the distrust and all of that the kidnapping with Hiju and all of that had instilled in his heart. And so that's a plus, I think, definitely. Whenever Chungwon's in danger, there's always this side benefit that happens. So everyone is stunned that Chungwon can read, and Chungwon's just trying to adjust to this new development. And he's, I think, enjoying being back at Kingdom. He definitely shows up to the office the next day. And one of the things he really does, there's two scenes where he almost meets Gongshil face to face, and that is as he's walking through his Kingdom Mall. And Gongshil tenses up, but she continues to walk, and then she stops as she passes him, right? And at that point, Chungwon just wants to keep walking, but the trash can lid flips, and I'm like, oh, the trash can ghost is wanting to help his, Chungwon buddy, right? But at that point, Chungwon stops, and then when he stops and he looks at the trash can lid, he notices Gongshil there, and so you can tell that he's trying to backtrack to talk, or at least kind of check out who Gongshil is, because he feels something about her. And then at that point, of course, Aunt Ju comes onto the scene. She realizes that Chungwon's about to go talk with Gongshil, and then she calls him and distracts him. So that was really the first instance that we see. The second one where, Chungwon and Gongshil have this meeting, or near meeting, if you will, is when Chungwon comes out of his office. And by the way, I just want to say, Chungwon, when he's doing this on his office desk, so incredibly adorable. But as he comes out of his office, he's used to taking his right, hallway. And it's so cute how one foot goes like this, but the other foot goes towards the left. And so you see this very interesting comment that he makes to himself, saying, I should go this way, but why does my body want to go this way? And then he tries to go again to the hallway on the right, and then his body insists on going to the left, and he's like, Ora, look at this. He's like, oh, look at this. So he then decides to follow his, I guess left foot's instinct. He ends up going and finds Gongshil and Kangwoo in what used to be a storage, but now has been converted into his office, and he demands from Kangwoo, whom he technically meets for the first time as the amnesiac, Chungwon. He's like, oh, you're Kangwoo, the new head of security. You're the one who has so much experience that you should actually, you could, guard the Blue House, the president, and still have things left over, for other things. And, or your talents exceed that of, you can get any job basically, right? And Kangwoo's like, oh yes, I am that person. And then he's like, and who is? And then he's trying to look at Gongshil, because as soon as she felt his presence in the room, Gongshil had turned around and put her back against Chungwon, right? And I don't necessarily know if it's because she doesn't want Chungwon to see her because of just the hurt that she's going to feel, or if she wants to try to help maintain his memory loss, right? And so maybe looking at her would then, propel that, who knows. But anyway, she refuses to look at him, and then Chungwon tries to take a look at her, and then Kangwoo, of course, steps in and prevents that. So in some respects, you see Kangwoo helping Gongshil, protect her in that sense, but also, that, interception by Kangwoo can also be seen a little bit self-serving, on a self-serving plane, because Kangwoo's made it very clear to Chungwon that he's going to stick around until Chungwon has no more use for Gongshil, so that when Gongshil's all alone, he could be there to be, there for Gongshil. Anyway, so Kangwoo helps Gongshil to go home, and then, he comforts her, and then he walks out, and then as he walks out, he finds Lee-ryung. And this, I think, was the cutest scene in the entire episode, which It is a bit ironic because a lot of the times, and maybe this is why I didn't like this episode as much, because in the past, the fun moments have always centered around Chungwon and Kungshil, right? But in this episode, I felt as though the fun moment was delegated to Kangwoo and Iryong. And so Iryong's like, oh great, so Kungshil is not in a good mood. Great, let me go see her because I need to see people who are more miserable than me, and that helps cheer me up, right? And so Kangwoo like literally pulls her by her hoodie. He refuses to let her go into Kongshil's, apartment to harass her. And then Iryong, she does this cute little Puss in Boots thing again, and she's like, Kangwoo, have you decided that you're gonna actually let me be part of your little aquarium, right? Or, part of your life. And then Kangwoo's like, no. And she's like, and then he tells her how he looked up one of the whales that she had mentioned, and it's actually non-existing. There's a white one, but not a black one, right? Or a dirt-colored one. And she's like, oh, you looked it up based on what I said? And so she has like all this hope that Kangwoo is actually paying more attention to her than he lets on, which on some level that is. And I'm just waiting for Kangwoo to kind of get the light bulb that even though he finds her annoying at this point, there is a part of him that finds her compatible with him and such. So there's this scene where she's just so enthusiastic and she says, it's okay. Just, you don't have to feed me. You don't have to give me oxygen in your little aquarium thing. Just keep me there and I will grow so big that you can't even kick me out. And then Kangwoo looks at her and he's like, is this how I look to Kungsu? And then she's like, why? Do you think it's because I look pathetic? And then Kangwoo's like, no, I think you actually look cool. And then so Idom's like, really? And then Kangwoo's like, yeah. You know what? I think I need to get cooler like you, bolder like you, so that I'll look cool to her. And so it's this very cute scene, very ironic scene where Iryong is thinking that the things that she does with Kangwoo are staying, or helping her relationship with Kangwoo, when in fact, Kangwoo is still thinking about how that stuff that he's learning from her can be applied to his relationship with Kongshil, right? And so as Iryong's driving away, she has this horrible vision of Kongshil and Kangwoo pretty much parroting what she had said to him. He's saying now to Kongshil, right? And then Kongshil says, "Oh, Kangwoo-shi," and then they hug and then they fall on the bed, and then the camera focuses on the Kongshil doll and the Tuli doll, right? And then Iryong's like, "I can't give Kongshil to Tuli," and then she starts to plan. And so I love how the scheme that Iryong is concocting is actually going to help, hopefully, bring Chungwon and Kongshil together. Although you find that it doesn't quite, because Kongshil doesn't quite let him see her face. They show up at the same restaurant, and it's because Iryong invites Kongshil, who's gone out to the bookstore to get The Wolf and the Goat book later that evening. She calls her and says, hey, let's meet at the restaurant. And then she calls Chungwon and says, I know it's late, but can you meet me at this restaurant because I have some very important information about the giant mall. So of course Chungwon's all like, ooh, I need to know secrets so I can squash this guy, my competitor. And so they show up, and Chungwon, of course, is about to head to the second floor. Kongshil is on the first floor of the restaurant, and then Chungwon happens to see her looking at this book, and he again only sees her back profile or her backside, but he notices the book and he's intrigued, and so he edges closer to her table. And then so when Kongshil sees that dead ghost waiter, she freaks out. She's about to kind of fall off her chair to the back, and then Chungwon stops her and he holds her, and of course he feels this intense kind of shock go between him and Kongshil, and then the ghost poops. And so Chungwon's like, I don't want you to think that I'm hitting on you or anything, but did you not feel this, shock? And I was only holding you because I thought you were going to fall off, and I was only intrigued because you were reading this book that's very similar to the one that I'm reading and such, right? And so Kongshil doesn't really look at Chungwon. She just, faces straight forward, and she's like, no, I didn't feel anything, which is very reminiscent actually of episode 1 when they were doing that whole thing in the car. Do you remember where Kongshil's like, I felt something, did you? And Chungwon's like, no, even though he clearly felt it, right? So the response with Chungwon in this episode, you can definitely sense that he seems off balance a bit. He's trying to figure out what's going on, what's happened, and so that makes for a much softer or gentler Chungwon, especially as he relates to Kongshil. And so he goes up and he's like, I could have sworn really that there was this definite like connection or shot. And then he then sees Kung-shi walking out of the restaurant with her stack of books. And I think finally for the first time he's able to see her. Well, fast forward then to a scene with the two little neighbors who have been collared for shoplifting, or what I guess in slang terms is called a five-finger discount, right? So VP's secretary brings the two little kids to Chungwon's office, saying that these two kids came to the toy department, grabbed some toys, and then handed the sales clerk Chungwon's business card, right? And so Chungwon's like, these aren't my business cards. How did you get them? You're not people that I normally hang out with, and things like that. And so Chungwon's trying to piece together what has happened in the time that I've lost, for these kids to get my business card and things like that. And then the kids eventually, not eventually, they tell him, you gave it to us, remember, when you were at our boarding house. And then Chungwon's like, I did this, and then he's about to just kind of dismiss them, and he calls the people in charge saying, you know what, let the kids take whatever toy they have now, but, give them a strong lecture about, the ethics of shoplifting and money and things like that, and send them home. And as he's about to sit back down on his desk, Sungmo, the older one, says, and I love their little facial expressions and how the little one, Sungjun, is always nodding, in agreement with his little older brother. But he says, I read Korean for you, do you remember? And then I even told you that you were the special person. And at that mention, Chungwon stops and he's like, who am I a special person to? And then they start talking. And Sungmo's like, to Kongsil Duna. And he's like, who? And he's like, Taegongsil Duna at our boarding, building. And, she told us that you were special. And so we told you. And, she's Taeyang, son or what have you, or Miss Tae. And at that point, Chungwon then is arrested. He stops. And even though he doesn't know what the heck is still going on, he now has a road to kind of go down to investigate, right? And all throughout this episode, the thing that I really didn't like was how Hanna was trying to maneuver her way so that she would look like Chungwon's special person. So earlier on in the episode, when Chungwon was still puzzled about who brought those books into his house, she falsely acknowledged that they were hers. The VP knows that they're not hers, and so he starts looking at her suspiciously, which is good. I love the fact that the VP is still, rooting for Chungwon and Kongsil. And then when Hanna sees Taegongsil, and Taegongsil happens to see Hiju's ghost, right? And she goes, Chaeju-shi. Then Hanna realizes that something is off with Kongsil, and as she talks to Kongsil, she notices the sun pendant. And so she makes the connection that Chungwon probably gave her the sun pendant, buys an identical one, puts it on her neck, which when she meets Chungwon then, he looks at it because he somehow recognizes or feels a connection with that necklace. Well, once Chungwon finds out from the little neighbors that, Kongsil is someone special, he takes off for her to go see Kongsil. And at that point, Kongsil has arrived at her house or her place, and she arrives to find Hiju there. And Hiju, without really saying much, is able to convey to Kongsil that because she knows Kongsil loves Chungwon, will she let Hiju use Kongsil's body? And Kongsil's like, can't you just tell me so that I can help catch the culprit and things like that? And Hiju says no. And so, at this point, I'm wondering just how trustworthy Hiju is, because there's a part of her, I'm sure, who may want to just stay in Kongsil's body so that she can continue living with Chungwon. But we know that's not possible because Chungwon will just chase her out every time he touches her. And so we don't have that to worry about, really. So Hiju wants to really borrow Kongsil's body so that she can stop her older sister. And we find out in this episode really the backstory of Hanna, who had been adopted by a very rich British man and Korean woman couple. And so she's actually lived a very, privileged life. Attending all the best schools and so on. And then she learns when she meets Secretary Kim, who happens to be her biological maternal uncle, that she had a twin, and so she was going to go to Korea. And when she goes to Korea, she finds out that Hiju actually was left in the orphanage and lived this very, miserable life, very different from her privileged life. And so whatever happened between her and Hiju during that visit completely changes Hanna. And so the uncle, Secretary Kim, gets permission from Chungwon, now that Chungwon can read, to take off for London or England and start investigating what happened with Hanna and try to reconnect with her and such. So it's a very interesting thing. I think in the scope of the story, logistics and things like that, there are some little pockets, like, of all the things, why would Secretary Kim have a picture of Hanna and Hiju in his desk? Why there of all things? Those little inconsistencies. But for the most part, I'm not liking Hanna, and I think that was the whole goal, was for us to not like her and try to figure out what motivates her to wait 15 years, almost 15 years, because right now she's biding her time until the statute of limitation on Chungwon's kidnapping is over for her to do something. So we're at episode next week, 14, 15, 16. We have 3 episodes in which to figure out for the writers to really kind of do what they will with Hanna, which I actually like. I don't like a lot of frustrating plot developments that drag on and on. So we know that whatever Hanna is planning, it's going to happen pretty quickly. The big issue I forgot to continue the recap, huh? So Hiju at that point asks Kongshil for the loan of her body. Kongshil, it looks like, is about to agree, but of course right before she agrees, she's twirled around. Hiju goes poof, and then she's face to face with Chungwon, who says, "On a stormy night." That's a code word between the 2 characters in the book that I'm reading, The Wolf and the Goat. You know me, don't you? Who are you? Are you Tang? And then that's how it ends, right? And so, episode 14 sounds really exciting to watch. I will say, you guys know, I didn't really care for episode 13 as much. And what I mean by that is, although I had a lot of fun watching it, it's not one that I'm going to continue to watch certain select scenes. I did that for episode 11. I did that for episode 10 and 9. There were certain scenes of those 3 episodes that as I was working on my treadmill, because I usually watch those episodes as I work out, I kept rewatching, especially I think it was episode 9, right, with the CEO and such. But anyhow, so there's that stalemate between those 2, and so we'll see what 14 brings. I will say, normally the cliffhangers to the odd numbered episodes aren't quite as dramatic, and I think because of the Chuseok preemption that happened, episode 13 didn't end as dramatically as it could have. So maybe 14's cliffhanger is going to be much more dramatic, which for us then, now that we're off schedule, it could be better, because with that more dramatic cliffhanger, the next day, being Thursday, will be episode 15, and so on. So we'll see. The only issues that I have with the story as of right now is this whole concern with the ghost consultant. On my blog, I listed 3 things that I was really concerned with in terms of what's going to get resolved and such. But what ultimately remains is, we've got Hanna and, whatever, evil scheme she's got up her sleeve. But the big issue for me is still the ghost consultant, who has made a pact with Kongshil, and Kongshil has basically agreed to indenture herself into this woman's services. And so I don't know how she's going to get out of that, whether Chungwon is going to step in or do whatever. And then there's still that residual, allegory and the paralleling of that allegory of the wolf and the goat. And so we see it again. Episode 12 certainly brought that to the forefront. Episode 13 continues that. I have no doubt episode 14, 15, and 16 will also continue the whole story of the goat and the wolf and the goat. So, as I mentioned on the blog, I'm hoping that the writers opt for the movie version and not the book version in which the wolf dies. And it is considered a romantic comedy, albeit a horror romantic comedy. So I'm hoping that in the true sense of the genre of romantic comedies, it is a happy ending. As for the horror aspect, I will say that I felt as though the ghost aspect of the series has become quite muted, which I don't mind personally, because episode 1, that ghost in episode 1 freaked me out. I started running on my treadmill because normally I just fast walk, but I started running on my treadmill because I was so freaked out. But the ghosts certainly have been less scary, which I am totally all for. So we'll see what the next three or the last three episodes bring to the table. So I think that's it. Dang it, 35 minutes. Thank goodness then that we didn't have episode, 14 to contend with, right? Anyway, that is it for me this week. I hope you had a great time listening to this, or that you found my 2 cents on episode 13 helpful or fun to listen to, watch, or what have you. I will see you all next week then. And that's it. For those of you who are interested in a little Chuseok giveaway that I am doing over on my blog, go ahead. I think it's listed under holiday and then Chuseok giveaway or something like that. So, all right, until next week, everyone, I will see you. I wish you a great week, and I will see you hopefully next Friday. All right, take care. Bye.